Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's first meeting of the Joint Committee's Subcommittee on Public Safety, Natural Resources, and Transportation. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Senator Goycochea? Here. Senator Harris? Here. Senator Nguyen? Here. Assemblywoman Anderson? Present. Assemblywoman Brown-May? Here. Assemblywoman Dickman? Here. Assemblywoman Gorlow? Here. Assemblyman Hathen? Here. And Chair Watts.
And I am present. Thank you. We have all members present. We have a quorum. Today on our agenda, we have several budget accounts from the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, as well as the budget for the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. Happy Valentine's Day. It's great to spend it with folks who love conservation budget accounts. We are going to take public comment at the end of today's meeting, and we'll ask folks to limit their comments to 2 minutes so that we can accommodate everyone. I do know we have some folks planning to make some public comments at the end of the meeting. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with our agenda for the day. So we'll welcome the director and the folks from the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources to come up. And whenever you're ready, you can state your name for the record and begin. I think an initial overview will be helpful, and then we'll just go budget by budget.
Thank you, Chairman and Subcommittee. James Settlemeyer, Director of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. I appreciate on Valentine's Day the opportunity to be before you, and we brought you a lovely PowerPoint for Valentine's Day as usual. In that respect, we also have with us Kelly Williams, who is our Chief Financial Officer, and of course our Deputy, Dominic Etchigoen, to answer any questions, and also several support staff behind us in case you get too far into the weeds that needs a little more clarification. With that, would you like us to start off with the PowerPoint, sir?
Yes, go ahead. And we did get a fairly thorough overview of the agency's budget during our pre-session briefing, so feel free to
skip as
to
much as
hit
possible.
the highlights.
Thank you, Chairman. With that, I appreciate it. With that, DCNR, as we indicated, our mission is, of course, to protect, manage, and enhance Nevada's natural, cultural, and recreational resources. Fortunately, we have the ability, we have great entities below us, our divisions. We have NDEP, Department of Environmental Protection, Division of Water Resources, Division of Forestry, SHPO, State Lands, State Parks, Heritage, and Outdoor. It's interesting to see all the different agencies that we have and divisions in that respect. We also have some standalone programs, 4 of them, the conservation districts, which a long time ago used to be a separate division, but they became their own standalone program. OHV, Sage Grouse, and Conserve Nevada, which is formerly the Question 1 Bonds program. With that, we also have 15 boards and commissions, 37 grants and programs. It's fascinating to me that once you add all that together with our seasonal staff, because of what the forestry department needs, you're actually over 900 people. Pretty daunting to me. With that, our department goals, of course, are to protect Nevada's natural, cultural, and outdoor recreational resources. Nevada Division of Outdoor does a fantastic job kind of taking the lead on making sure to discuss those natural resources and opportunities as well as state lands. Improve our efficiencies and streamline our process to reduce or eliminate backlogs. Due to COVID and various reasons and just some of the complexities of the departments and vacancies, some of them have a pretty sufficient backlog, just trying to process paperwork. We've given those reports that Justin had asked for, that information. We've given that to you guys, kind of describing that, mainly within, of course, NDEP and, of course, within Division of Water Resources. For some reason, people like to litigate sometimes certain divisions, and sometimes that tends to create a bottleneck. We're also seeking to modernize our services to increase our public access, to improve customer experience, and expand opportunities for interagency interactions. Within that, we're looking more at computers, the concept of getting that information out to the public so that they can see it. Within Division of Water Resources, we had a wonderful trip to Winnemucca where we actually saw he bought a scanner, and he's actually saving all the paperwork that got flooded at the Humboldt Courthouse and digitizing them so you can put them up for everyone to see. So you're talking about documents that are over 100 years, hundreds of years old, dealing with water. That'll be accessible to the general public. The hope is that saves him, well, not a hope, it will. It'll save him tons of time of having to actually go find those maps. When someone asks for a public information request, you can just send them a hyperlink. So I think that'll be very beneficial. We're also seeking to manage and the development of natural, cultural, and recreational resources to responsibly increase economic opportunities in Nevada's communities. There are so many great things out there that the state of Nevada has to offer. It's important that we help the counties and citizens to show them what's going on. In this position, just in the short time I've been here, the amount of things that I've come across, I didn't give enough attention to the state historical markers. Now, as I'm out and about trying to read those and look at that information, it's just fascinating to me. We're also trying to grow our stewardship capacity through partnerships with the federal, state, local, and philanthropic entities. If you look at it, we actually have the opportunities within Ice Age Fossil Park. We have a private donor that's stepped forward, and through the Interim Committee of Finance, IFC, you guys were able to allow us to accept that more than generous donation for those purposes. And we're trying to establish those and work across the different agencies. There should be no separate silos. We should all be working towards one goal, serving the citizens of the state of Nevada. And so that's what we're seeking to do. Within that, our challenges, recruitment and retention challenges that cause high vacancy rates and turnover. Again, we sent you all that information. You have that data. You can see, sadly, what we pay our state employees compared to the counties, Washoe and Clark, and we all know the private sector. So the people that are working in the state of Nevada are really doing it for the right purpose, in my opinion. They're trying to further the state of Nevada. And so we need to recognize them for that. And I appreciate the governor's budget trying to give them a little bit more in that respect. I think that'll help us with our retention. External pressures such as population growth and economic conditions that heighten demand and underscore the need for us to act quickly. As we had a discussion last time, you don't know what you don't know. We don't know what the next catastrophe is around the corner. Who knows? Could be another balloon. Just kidding. We have aging equipment and outdated infrastructure. We have all known that for a long time. Several bad budgetary years have led to that. So all we're trying to do is replace our equipment based upon the state replacement policies. So it's not like we're trying to buy all new bells and whistles. It's just the stuff we had was so old. Lack of resources to ensure decision making based on our recent reliable data and best available science. And that becomes interesting because as you discuss like an evaporation study, then all of a sudden the feds come out with a new policy on evaporation study that says the study that you had that was literally a year old is no good, which is kind of strange. But then again, it's kind of like buying a computer. The day you bought it, it was probably outdated. We have a discussion about increasing litigation that multiplies costs and adds time to the administrative and regulatory process. We all know that. It's just part of being in the job. So increased time and dedication resources to comply with collective bargaining process. Again, it doesn't matter whether you're for it, whether you're against it. It's here. And there are costs that go with it. Luckily, the deputy for DCNR, Dominic Ketchcone, has been kind of taking over a lot of those discussions, but that eats up time. Threats of catastrophic wildfires, invasive species, drought, and again, like we said, we don't know what's to come. The next page is our pie chart. And as you can kind of see that a lot of the discussion within here, a lot of it comes from the budget, the general fund, and some of it comes from other sources. If you go to the next page, the budget overview, it's always interesting to me to look at how much comes from the general fund. Like you go to the sagebrush ecosystem, most of that's federal or from other departments. So zero comes from the direct general fund. But with that, we went over that one last time. We'll go ahead and skip along because I know you guys have a lot of fun questions to ask as usual. So with that, the mission of the Director's Office is to protect, manage, and enhance Nevada's cultural and recreational resources. That brings us to our budget count, 4150. For our biennium total, we have 14 total FTEs within the Director's Office. Within that, if you go to the next slide, the deck unit E253 is again just restoring travel and operating authority. What occurred during COVID, as we all know, nobody traveled. We tended to use a lot more Zoom. And it's great technology, don't get me wrong. It's phenomenal in many respects, but it is also great to have this interaction face to face. And we're not seeking to get more money we had in the past. We're just in the budget restoring what we once had that we lost due to COVID. One-shot appropriations, again, just within the confines of the replacement policies of the state of Nevada. That then takes us to the Sagebrush Ecosystem Program. It's a team that's made up from individuals from state lands, forestry, NDOW, and of course the Department of Ag. It's a great process that was started a long time ago to try to help make sure that the sage grouse didn't necessarily become listed as a threatened or endangered species, giving some flexibility for the state to still accomplish things while protecting that important resource. With that, like I said, I'll try to skip over these to make it go a little bit better. That brings us, of course, to a question which I'm sure we'll have tons of questions on. The Nevada Water Conservation and Infrastructure Initiative.
Actually, Director, I think it might work better now that we're kind of getting into overviews of accounts if we actually just kind of dig into each budget account and then go through any questions that members may have on an account-by-account basis.
Your call, Chairman.
All right. Thank you. So let's go back to budget account 4150. Do any members have questions on budget account 4150? DCNR administration. Okay. With that, Director, would you mind going to, I think you started to talk about this, can we go into 4159, the Water Conservation Infrastructure Budget Account?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Didn't want to skip over 4156, which of course is the account to restore the sagebrush ecosystem. If there are no questions, Mr. Chairman, from you or your committee, I'll proceed on to the next one.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. That being said, that takes us to the Nevada Water Conservation and Infrastructure Initiative. It's focused on reducing water demands across the state and ensuring a long-term reliability of water resources. This deals with ARA fundings that came to the state of Nevada. Originally, they were going to potentially go into the state revolving fund. The previous administration decided to choose to put it forth in this program instead, which allows for the opportunity to have two individuals. So when I came into the position, we had our first meeting on the 17th, I believe it was, of January. We had a technical advisory committee in that respect, and with many, I think there's about 15 or 20 different entities that were there, from Southern Nevada Water Authority to TUMWA, the Department of Ag, conservation groups. Anyway, so we're also going to be meeting here in early March to discuss the funding criteria even further. We went through those criteria, had unanimous agreement on the different aspects of that, but we wanted to change some of the wording. We all know what we want to do. We want to make sure these funds get to the most problematic natural resource problems that are potentially contaminating the water supplies in order to protect those water supplies, as well as the water infrastructure to get to places that may not have it. The question is how do you define those correctly? This body has struggled with those terms, and now I'm having the same job of struggling with those terms, trying to figure out how to make sure it gets to communities that desperately need it without using terminologies that they may not agree with. So we're trying to go through those different procedures. We'll open the grant process up in the spring of 2023 to award the $99.5 million of our water and sewer infrastructure funds. We're working to establish positions currently within that. We're allowed to have two individuals. When I came on, no one was available at that time frame. We have two individuals that are going to dedicate half of their time right now. We're working on those contracts with those individuals coming forward to provide one full-time person, and then, as you know, with vacancy rates, trying to seek the other person as well. Because it's very critical. This thing isn't just about giving out money. First, we have to establish the criteria, then we have to figure out the plan to implement it, then we have to actually implement it, and we need follow-up. Just a reality, if you're going to put out $100 million, you better make sure people are actually doing what they said. Not that anybody ever would not do that and just take money. But with that, is there any questions within that particular deck unit? I'm sure there will be from Senator Kokachia at least, if not a few others.
Thank you very much, Director. We'll open it up to questions. We'll start with Senator Kokachia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just first and foremost, it shows there you're going to award 99.5, but I thought that was 5%. You were retaining to put the criteria, that would be 5 million rather than 500,000, correct?
So, Mr. Chairman, can I go directly to Senator Kokachia, or would you mean to go through you to you?
You can go directly to the member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Kokachia, we think we have the authority to go up to, but we're just trying not to spend that much money. We're trying to actually get more on the ground, but I will allow our Chief Financial Officer, Kelly Williams, to correct me if I'm incorrect.
So in looking at that slide, sorry, for the record, Kelly Williams, Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. So that slide, actually, that should be 95 million. Thank you for that catch. We do have 5 million set aside for administration, although we don't anticipate needing the full 5 million for the administration. So we will then do a work program to move that into the grant category as we find out how much we actually need for those grants. But the 5 million is probably more than what we're going to need for the administration, because we're really only funding 2 potential positions and some contract work with that currently.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a quick follow-up, if I may. I understand you're going through the process and how difficult it is to ramp this up and come up with the advisory committee. And of course, I know I advocated early last fall and was hoping that we could carve at least a piece of this 100 million out to, in my mind, the burning question is, how much water have we got in the bank statewide? And I really felt some of this should have been focused on that rather than just saying, oh, well, our evaporation studies or the science shows that we've got this. We really don't have a real database in place, and I've been advocating for that. But I do understand there are a ton of needs out there, infrastructure needs, and I just hope that as you and your committee work on this, that we recognize some of the needs in the smaller communities, as well as we know we've got some larger communities that could use this 100 million and never look back, and we know that. So thank you, sir, and look forward to, as you develop your council comes up with where we're going to spend it, but always remember we need to know what we've got, especially coming out of the drought. It's pretty hard to put pipe in the ground if you haven't got anything to put in it. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Senator Gokachia. Luckily, the diversity within that group represents the larger water purveyors and the smallest water purveyors, and even some guy that works at the Department of Ag that has a funny sounding name.
Thank you, Director. Just a reminder for everyone, please state their name for the record before you give comments. I think it sounds like the Technical Advisory Committee has a very diverse composition, because I haven't had anyone complain that they have not been included on it yet. But as a follow-up for our committee's information, I think it'd be helpful if you could provide some additional information on who sits on that. I'm excited. I know that this was something I think that came out of the October Interim Finance Committee, and so I'm excited to see the department moving so quickly. It's got an ambitious timeline to open up applications. Could you just speak a little bit more about, so I think you've done a good job of laying out what's been done up to this point, but with bringing on staff and developing this criteria, and then can you just speak to kind of what's the path ahead for the next few months? Not only, so you're going to open applications in the spring, and then can you talk about kind of what the process looks like for scoring those and getting awards out the door?
Sure. Thank you, Chairman. This is Director Settlemeyer for DCNR. Again, so just on a timeline process, we're currently getting the paperwork done to get 2 people hired into the position. We're looking to have later in about mid-March. We find the proper date. As you know, sometimes when you're dealing with these different entities, trying to get everyone to agree on a day can be interesting. My first experience with programs such as Doodle, to try to pull dates from individuals that I've never experienced before. But in that respect, we're looking about mid-March to have another TAC meeting to go through the criteria. We've all had our own homework assignments to try to find the correct terminologies and different programs and areas to give exactly what we're looking for. Again, we know what we're trying to look for is we're trying to make sure that these resources get to where they need to get. But how do we create an effective criteria that will get us to that? And some of it came to discussions of, I don't use that terminology. Some groups don't like that term. This group doesn't like that term. But we all agreed where we want to try to get it, and that is to where the need is in order to benefit the water supply. So that's going to happen about mid-March. Hopefully everyone will agree and we can wrap it up at that point within the scoring system. The concept is by spring to be able to start awarding, having people submit applications, have them go through the grading process in order to get these resources out as soon as possible. And I believe that we have, I want to say, and I'll have to be corrected, I think it's something like 2 years to award the money and then 3 years for it to get done. And that's extremely ambitious if someone was to get a fairly large project to try to get that all in the ground in 3 years, especially because, in my opinion, we're very fortunate to have extra resources around nowadays to get projects done. That creates a little bit of a problem. Do we have enough contractors and enough workers to actually get it all done in the subsequent time frame? I'm a little concerned about that. And also, because there is such a high demand for employees, which is great, it creates a situation where we're not necessarily going to quite get as much as we thought we would. But hopefully the time frame will be quick enough also that cost overruns don't get into it. Because as we've discovered, the longer a grant sits, the cost incrementally increases, just due to the rising costs in steel and stuff of that nature. But with that, if there's somebody here who wants to throw me a lifeline and correct me on those years, but I believe that's the information I remember.
Thank you, Director. We appreciate that, and I think especially Senator Goycochea and I, and probably other members of the committee, will just be interested, especially as some of the initial phases of this continue to move along during the session, to get some periodic updates as that's moving forward. Members, additional questions on this budget account? Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just kind of trying to figure out, okay, you say you're going to have another meeting of the Advisory Council in mid-March. Will that be an open meeting, a posted agenda? Will we know who the players are? Let's be honest, there are going to be some people in this room, I assume, that are going to want to lobby that committee to at least figure out how to score a little higher in their matrix.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Goycochea. This is Director Settlemeyer. In that respect, we will get the list to you probably by later today to all members of this committee. I'll make sure to send an email myself with all of our Technical Advisory Committee members, the TAC members. As far as the first meeting, I can't tell you. I know it was being teleconferenced to 4 different locations around the state of Nevada. In that respect, I can't recall whether or not it was if we did it open to the public or not. The Technical Advisory Committee I don't believe it's necessarily subject to open meeting law, but I have no problem having it open to the general public. But it was, to tell you the truth, my first meeting. I think I was the second day on the job. So in that respect, I'll get that information to you as soon as I find it and forward it on to you, of course, as well as Chairman Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and I've been reminded as well that when this item was approved, we did request quarterly reports to the Interim Finance Committee, so we will be continuing to get updates that way as well. Okay, seeing no other questions on this budget account, Director, you can proceed to the next budget.
Thank you, Chairman. James Settlemeyer again, Director. Gets us to the Conservation District Program. Its goal is to support the 28 locally led conservation districts to encourage your community-based efforts to conserve the natural resources and ecosystems. When I got out of college, I actually got on our local Carson Valley Conservation District. In that respect, I served on that for over 20 odd years. It was interesting that it wasn't a conflict of interest to be on that and in this body at the same time, according to legal, so I was allowed to stay on that one. However, I did 6 years on the Nevada State Conservation Commission, which actually works within these conservation districts and is one of our boards under us. So I did 6 years on that. And of course, it was interesting when I became a legislature, that was a conflict. So that one had to be dropped in that respect. But in that respect, what we're looking to do within there is a long time ago, I actually was successful in getting that up to $10,000 per conservation district, one session. Unfortunately, due to economic times, that went all the way down to back to its original 5 and actually then went to 4. The governor, I appreciate, was willing to increase that amount of money going to these individuals up to the concept of $4,500 per conservation district and an additional $10,000 in E523, which goes to basically the sage grouse program in that respect, and also to restore a travel authority because, again, with what occurred, we didn't get out of the office as much. And it's very important to get out to these conservation districts and to help them and try to help them work through potential grants that may be able to benefit their community. Most of these conservation districts, and they're trying to get the most recent data, so don't misquote me, but back in my day on the commission, we had them to about 28-to-1 match. So for every dollar the state threw at it, they're able to find $28 either between donations. I know that Elko County is kind enough to give an additional $1,000, I believe, to each one of their conservation districts. Douglas County helps out conservation districts usually with some, grant fundings for programs that they see fit. but it's just a great way for the local entities of conservation districts. And the conservation districts established out of the Dust Bowl because of what was going on with soil at that time. So in that respect, they were the leaders. However, an interesting thing occurred. The reason conservation districts came about is because, well, it's kind of funny. Somebody at the federal government, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, federal government comes up and knocks on a rancher's door and says, hey, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help. It didn't go well. No one wanted to work with them. So they established these local conservation districts were made up of local agriculturalists, which then your friends felt like, well, they're our neighbors. And they actually know pretty good guys that know about this stuff. They're elected from the actual landowners in that community. So with that, the NRCS works in partnership with those conservation districts, usually also with the FSA, Farm Service Agencies. And I forget the proper terminology for what you call that, because if you have all three of them, it's a trifecta in a community, and it's a pretty big deal to be a USDA service center. That's what it was. Sorry, I had to jog my memory. That being said, we have 4 individuals, located between Winnemucca, Elko, Ely, and we're just currently hiring the vacant position. With that, we also are doing some computer replacement, again, based upon the aging stuff. Is there any questions within that particular deck unit, Chairman?
Thank you, Director. And I'll just say that I'm very glad that now you're with the government and here to help everyone.
Touche, touche.
So we'll open it up to questions. I believe we'll start with Senator Nguyen, and then we'll go to Assemblywoman Dickman.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question about how the conservation districts utilize the annual grant funding received from this budget.
Sure. So, again, James Settlemeyer for the record, Assemblywoman. So within that respect, I can only tell you what they did in the past. I can't really predict the future of how they're going to use their funds. So, but traditionally within inductive logic, the past is always, the future is representative of that past. So within like the Carson Valley Conservation District, I know that we work within going and trying to actually do weed control measures for noxious weeds. Several conservation districts have that listed. They also try to work within channel restoration. Sometimes after a major flood event, you have problems within the irrigational systems, within the river systems, and need to get in there and rechannelize in order to make sure that water flows accordingly. Some of them enter into these different programs, grants, if they happen to have sage-grouse sensitive habitats, which again isn't available in all conservation districts, as we know, because, well, sage-grouse aren't in all conservation districts. Within that, most of them are within one county. Elko has several conservation districts, and what happens is the State Conservation Commission oversees the data, the information from those conservation districts at an annual meeting and certifies them to be within what's called good standing. And through that good standing, they go through their financials, a little bit too much in my opinion. Again, you're talking about $4,000, so if you're getting into a pretty good audit per se, it seems to be that we might be spending a little bit more money than necessary getting into that detail. They also make sure that they have at least 3 public meetings a year, which is a requirement to be in good standing. But again, the State Conservation goes through, ensures that the resources are being used appropriately within the confines of the State Conservation Commission, which is laid out within NRS, Nevada Revised Statutes, and I don't remember off the top of my head the number. But there is oversight within that capacity. But those are some of the programs. If you have anything specific, I can deal with the Conservation District Coordinator and try to get to you what a particular conservation district is doing, either in your area or any one that you want. And if there's a particular interest in what they're doing, I can try to find a district doing that. And with 28 of them, you'll find that. Because you have everything from backyard conservationists up at Tahoe. They're worrying about people's backyards for wildfire danger and things of that nature, to bark beetles, to the larger, 2,000, 3,000, 10,000 acre ranches that are trying to figure out grazing allotments. So it varies. Sorry for such a long answer.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
With that, my deputy would like to comment if that's acceptable, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Dominic Etchegoyen, Deputy Director, Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Director Settlemeyer is absolutely right. Those are a lot of the things that we use those dollars for, but as you recognize, $4,000 and $4,500 is not a lot. This stipend that we pass through can be used for those things. Often it covers just some very basics that allow the conservation districts to do that work. A lot of those conservation districts need insurance for their work they do. They need assistance from secretaries, executive assistants to do the paperwork. They need public accountants for the reporting that they're doing. So it covers very little, but that shows just how much they do with the limited amount that we give them to be able to do all the river restoration, all the noxious weed work that they do as well. But sometimes it's covering just the basics.
With that, if I could add one thing. The state of Nevada, through the Attorney General, not the current one, but a previous one, decided that all the Conservation District board members had to pay what's called error and liabilities. That's about $127.50 per board member that has to be paid a year for those protections. So, there's some things that occur where we're like the deputy indicated, we're just paying minimal stuff. We'd like to get to the point where every conservation district had enough resources to make sure to hire someone, even just on a part-time basis, to help with administrative stuff. Because again, these conservation district members are not paid, they're not compensated, so they pay their own gas to get to the meeting and all that type of stuff. So in that respect, they're really doing it because of what they believe in.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Dickman, then we'll go to Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here, Mr. Director. It's so good to see you. I just have a question about the increased funding for the sage grouse grants. So if this is approved, what do you expect the benefits will be to the habitat?
Thank you for that question, Assemblywoman. I'm not sure if we have Kelly McGowan or anybody here from the sage grouse ecosystem. I don't believe I have a lifeline there. So if you look at the amount of resources that are going, it's an additional 10,000, which I think currently they have 50, if I'm correct. So this would take it, they have 65. So with that, that'll allow them to, again, since generally they're running about a match ratio, for every dollar. I forget exactly what sage grouse is. I want to say last time we talked to Mr. McGowan, who's in charge, I think it was something in the neighborhood of 15 to 1. Based on the federal funds that they get. But what they're trying to do is, of course, protect that habitat, do more projects on the ground, such as pinyon juniper removal, which will then create more sage grouse habitat for the sage grouse. But with that, Deputy, anything you wanted to add on that particular?
Thank you. Dominic Etchegoyen, Deputy Director, Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Each year, this is an annual application that is approved by the State Conservation Commission based on the applications that are received for the work to be done. And correct, a lot of times it can be pinyon juniper removal. A lot of times it's an invasive, noxious species that they're working on removing Medusa head in some of these primary core habitats that are important for the sage grouse to ensure that we are doing the best we can on these lands to provide the habitat near and around these leks. So it's different every year based on the applications that we receive, but it's fantastic, phenomenal work that we hope goes to ensure that the sage grouse does not get listed.
Thank you for that, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Anderson. No? Any other questions from members? I do have one question, and I had the opportunity to go attend the Conservation District annual meeting in, I believe it was in Fallon last year, and talk about water issues. And I'm excited to see that that we are restoring some funding, and glad you brought up soil, because I know that there is going to be some policy discussions related to soil conservation, and hopefully there's some resources that can support that as well. Yeah, the question that I had is, I see that that the budget proposal includes a full restoration to pre-pandemic levels for the sage grouse competitive grants, but only a partial restoration of these kind of baseline grants. Again, you indicated it was at 5,000, went down to 4,000, and now we're just planning to come up to 4,500. And I was just wondering if you can explain a little bit more why we're not trying to move that back up to the 5,000 restoration of where we were pre-pandemic.
Thank you, Chairman. This is Director Settlemeyer. Again, within that aspect, my first assembly term, or I think it was second, so you'd have to go back 14 years ago. We took it from 5,000 to 10,000. Then we went through the recession, and it went down to about 4 for a long time. And so this is actually a concept, I don't even think during the pandemic we were at 5. We were still at 4. So this is working towards that goal. One of the things, part of me says, give them everything you can. Interesting though, we do have some conservation districts. We have quite a gambit there. We have some that are extremely small. And sometimes they can't even spend the additional $500 and prove, because it's a match type basis. Not only do they give them the money, we have to be able to show that they spent that money. And so within that, it could be a situation where if we grew them too much at one time, the smaller ones may not be able to compete as well. Now, the larger ones, such as the Lake Tahoe Conservation District, even the Carson Valley Conservation District, could gobble up quite a bit, I'll just put it that way, and could do some great work. But that's the concept, I think, that's coming along, is to keep the needle moving, keep moving forward within that respect. But with that, I believe that our Chief Financial Officer, Kelly Williams, would like to elaborate on that a little further, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Hello, Kelly Williams, Chief Financial Officer for DCNR. So just a little bit of a more recent history of that grant payment. It was cut during the recession in 2010, 2012 timeframe. We have worked to bring it back up to a 5,000 level. It was 5,000 in fiscal year 20 and was approved for 5,000 in 21. When the pandemic hit, we did have to find budget cuts across the board. So we did bring it back down to, I believe it was 4,000. And so this is our attempt to start getting it back up to the 5,000 level. We did actually do a payment to the districts of $5,000 in, I believe it was fiscal year 20, but then after that it was reduced back down to 4,000. So our goal would be to eventually bring it back up to 5,000 or more. But this budget, when we submitted our agency request budgets, this is what we were able to fit within our general fund at the time when we submitted our budgets.
Thank you for that additional clarification. I think many of us, we understand the needs that your agency has and want to make sure that it is resourced adequately to do its work. So I would be interested in seeing, with all the other proposals that are out there, the amount that it costs to restore this, I think, is well worthwhile for all the work that those conservation districts do. Any last questions, comments? Senator Goycochea, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it might be beneficial for the committee if you actually could do a handout that showed the 28 districts and where they are. Not that it really makes a difference, but you get a size comparison. Like you said, Elko County has 8 conservation districts in the county. So, again, and it might be something we could look at as, an additional pot of money that would be available to some of the larger districts. It could put it to use. Kind of another grant process, rather than, like you said, throw 10,000. Some of them could not use it, maybe wouldn't use it wisely. Others, the larger ones, they even buy grain drills, and they actually, some of the bigger ones get a lot of work accomplished with very little funding. But maybe we should be looking at, a base level of $5,000 or so, and an additional pot of, say, 20, 30,000. It could be accessed by some of these groups are just better than others. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And I'll just say, as far as that, I think you can provide that again as a follow-up item to the members of the committee, and we'll keep this discussion going.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that you went to the State Association and Conservation Districts meeting in Fallon, interesting group of individuals. And some of these individuals, some of the local conservation districts contribute money towards the State Association of Conservation Districts. Some are not as well off, and they decided that, no, we're okay. But I appreciate you attending that one. We will get you a list of the 28 districts. So again, send out to everyone so that they can see that information. If you're willing to proceed to the next one.
Yes, we are. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that respect, I'm going to step away from the dais, as well as my Deputy Director, and we will allow Greg Lovato and Jeff Kinder of the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection to present the next aspect of this. Again, NDEP is the largest within our different operations, and so we felt it was more important to have a personal touch to that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Lovato. Mr. Kinder, whenever you're ready, state your names for the record and you can proceed.
Good morning, Chair Watts, members of the subcommittee. Greg Lovato, Administrator of the Division of Environmental Protection. With me is Jeffrey Kinder. Jeff manages our air programs, environmental cleanup, and sustainable materials management. So, really now more than ever, NDP's mission to protect and enhance our air, land, water, sustain healthy ecosystems, and is just critical to helping a vibrant economy. We see with everything from addressing lead in drinking water at daycare and schools, putting in place timely and effective environmental controls at new facilities and new industries, reducing impacts, continuing to reduce impacts of fine sediment on Lake Tahoe Clarity, cleaning up abandoned mine lands, and we are continuing our key role in serving the public. So as you know, in addition to implementing the major environmental federal statutes delegated by EPA, we also oversee state-only programs for mining regulation and reclamation, as well as chemical accident prevention program. We do this with 275 staff positions, including 30 in Las Vegas. So for division goals and focus right now, we really need to maximize the environmental benefit of funding we have received from settlements and that we are receiving and anticipate pursuing under new, much larger federal appropriations. Just for example, in terms of leveraging environmental benefit under the Volkswagen settlement, to date we have leveraged $15 million in settlement funds to access almost $40 million in partner funding, and we've reduced air pollution by over 1.5 times the amount of excess emissions from VW vehicles with defeat devices. We are working to take advantage of a range of new federal funding programs, and I'll talk more about those in a few minutes. We continue to prioritize permitting actions for new and major modifications, and we meet with prospective new facilities to expedite the application and permitting process, and this is especially important for industries that are permitting novel technologies for the first time in Nevada. On the public side, we are conducting more routine outreach on proposed permitting actions, as well as enhanced outreach to communities who express interest and have questions. We are making more information available online, and we have established channels of communication with tribal environmental directors through our Tribal Environmental Liaison at the Intertribal Council of Nevada. All our key rulemakings over the past couple of years have involved extensive outreach and public input outside of the normally required public workshops. So in terms of challenges, trying to be repetitive, but it's worth emphasizing, we've sustained a steady increase in personnel vacancies from around 5% in 2017. That's actually when I started as administrator, to 17% today. I hope there's no, causation issue there, but I just had to throw that out there. So many key scientists, engineer positions, as well as fiscal, personnel, administrative staff. We also have an increasing number of underfilled positions. So these are staff who don't have experience and qualifications for the senior level in the series. So that's how it starts. And then, over time, together with cost of living, retirements, we're getting backlogs, and this is really contributing to staff and management burnout. We're having a difficult time competing, really for younger talent, against other employers with higher pay and benefits. I think people who have been here a while, they'll probably stick it out. Again, as a state agency accountable to the public, we strive for transparency in our decision-making process, and we value oversight. But increased public records requests can and do divert agency resources from our core environmental regulatory responsibilities. We have been able to satisfy requests more quickly and stem the workload impact to some extent with our electronic document management. Externally, we continue to face the chronic problem of flat federal funding for our core environmental programs while contending with increased federal rules and requirements to implement. So this forces us to look to other revenue sources from grant funding to maintain primacy and run the programs in Nevada, and this has been especially challenging in our safe drinking water program. So here's the big picture for the governor recommended budget. NDEP does not rely on any general fund money. All of our revenue comes from fees, grants, settlements, and reimbursable agreements. Regardless of funding source, we know this is public money, and we take our fiduciary duty seriously. Before getting into the specific budget accounts, I wanted to quickly touch on the highlights of new federal project funding for NDEP-administered grant and loan programs. So biggest and front and up front is our state revolving fund program for drinking water and clean water infrastructure. We're building on our past success of over $1 billion in project funding since program inception, while maintaining AAA bond ratings to take best advantage of new federal funding and address bigger projects. So we've been streamlining processes, adding positions, contracting capacity. We've been updating regulations. We have a bill that AB 20 helping to take advantage of federal funding. We've introduced just this year a new web-based platform to modernize our application funding and technical assistance process. We work closely with USDA and other funding sources, including the State Infrastructure Bank and programs funded by ARPA, to identify the best mix of funding for project and community and recipient needs. At the same time, we are facing some challenges with larger borrowers cautious about receiving loans, as well as supply chain backlogs and skilled trade shortages causing delays. Since the recent federal funding was announced, we've seen the projects on our water infrastructure priority list grow by over 80 projects and over $1 billion in new project leads. So we're actually outstripping, the new funding in terms of identifying project needs. Sometimes it's kind of a catch-22 where people won't tell you what their real needs are until they know you have the money, and then getting the money, they want to know what needs you are. So, but we're doing pretty well. We're going to be able to utilize all the funding for our normal clean water, drinking water infrastructure. So in terms of lead service lines, there is new funding provided for lead service lines. Unfortunately, Nevada has not completed in the past inventories to identify replacement projects. While we benefit from relatively new infrastructure, we have some of the lowest lead service line estimates per capita in the nation. It does make it difficult to identify projects where we can replace lead service lines. Nevertheless, we're working on ways to take advantage of this federal funding this year. We'll be talking further with EPA and others about how we can take full advantage. And we also are embarking on assessments of drinking water sources for the presence of PFAS compounds in order to determine how we can utilize that funding. Our brownfields program helps local communities assess and, if needed, clean up potentially contaminated properties to ready them for reuse. They've completed a lot of road trips throughout the state. They're positioned to apply for and utilize over $2 million in new funding to address these sites in the coming biennium. Our water quality program expects to receive an additional $40,000 a year in supplemental funding to support statewide and local planning entities update their water quality management plans. And finally, under the bipartisan infrastructure law, we are now applying for recycling grants, which EPA has been offered in many, many years. As Jeff Kinder will explain, NDEP has been teaming up with a diverse group in the state called Partners for Sustainable Nevada to help identify the best opportunities to increase the state's recycling rate. And these types of partnerships will help make sure Nevada will make best use of any federal funds we receive. Lastly, under the Inflation Reduction Act, we are communicating with EPA and will be assessing opportunities with Nevada partners for additional air pollution reduction projects for transportation fleets, building on our successful experience managing the VW settlement and the Diesel Emission Reduction Act funding. So we'll now move to reviewing the requested enhancements for budget accounts 3185, our air programs, and 3187, which combines our sustainable materials, corrective actions, and Department of Energy oversight programs. With that, I'll turn it over to Jeff Kinder to review the major enhancements for the two budgets.
Chairman Watts, members of the committee, I'm Jeffrey Kinder, Deputy Administrator with NDEP. For our air program budget 3185, this supports two bureaus within NDEP, the Bureau of Air Pollution Control, which does our permitting, chemical accident prevention program and compliance, as well as our Bureau of Air Quality Planning, which does our planning functions, our mobile source work. There's a number of enhancements on the slide. I was going to focus on the ones bolded, if that's okay with the committee. So E256, this is funding for high-resolution satellite imagery. So a little background. So under the Clean Air Act, EPA sets ambient air quality standards. And a state has to demonstrate either attainment or non-attainment. So when a state is in attainment, there is no impact to growth in the state under the Clean Air Act. However, if a state gets a designation of non-attainment, then under the Clean Air Act, we're looking at offsets from existing growth to support new growth. So a critical function there is what we call exceptional events, wildland fires, dust events because of high wind events. And if the state is able to show that those are exceptional events, we can take that out of that 3-year average where we make those attainment, non-attainment decisions. So the primary purpose of these high-resolution satellite imagery is be able to do those, effectively conduct those types of analysis and effectively show when exceptional events occur in the state and where they affect the state. We would also look to use this high-resolution satellite imagery also for permitting. Nevada is a big state. For us to effectively permit, we have a lot of projects that occur in the rural part of the state. A lot of our work is done on modeling analysis to issue permitting decisions, so it's critical to establish things like fence lines. A lot of our analysis is for surface area disturbance permitting. How big is the disturbance? What type of air emissions that would have? So we would also use this enhancement also to enhance our permitting program as well, and then potentially compliance issues should those arise if needed. So that's E256. And then we have 2 position reclassifications for consideration, which is E805 and E806. Both of these pertain to our GHG and mobile source branch within the Bureau of Air Quality Planning. So in 2007, the legislature required NDEP to begin producing an every 4-year GHG inventory and projections report. That began in 2008 and continued for several cycles through the 4-year cycle. Historically, what we've done is relied on EPA's state inventory tool. So what happens there is a number of federal agencies collect local and state data from Nevada. EPA then aggregates that and then sends it back out to the state basically just on population. So what we have learned is, there's a significant lag, normally 4 years, of when we actually get actual data, as well as some inaccuracies in that data because population doesn't tell the whole story of how unique Nevada can be. Additionally, in 2019, AB 254 changed our requirements for this reporting, made it annual for some of the sectors, as well as included some other requirements. So what we're now doing is looking to collect that state and local data ourselves, consider in the context of Nevada's uniqueness, and provide those actual data as the inventory, that actual data with no less than like 1 year of lag, as well as have much more accurate projections going forward. We believe transitioning from an environmental scientist for a position to a supervisor or professional engineer for that branch will lend itself to doing that work. The second reclassification is very similar to the first one, working within that. That branch also does our mobile source work, as Administrator Lovato mentioned. We've had a lot of success with the VW settlement, as well as I believe we've been in the diesel emission reduction program since 2008 with EPA, which allows us to work with a lot of communities in changing out older diesel vehicles and providing newer technology. And that is it for 3185, if there are any questions.
Thank you. We do have some questions that we'll start with Senator Harris, then we'll go to Assemblywoman Gorlow, and then we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Chair. My question has to do with the reclassification of the positions. I guess my first question is, if one of the positions you're looking to classify is vacant, and you are asking for just the difference in what would be the current salary and the reclassification, what's happened to the salary that was appropriated for this position but remained vacant? Does it revert back to the federal government, right? Like, how did those dollars get accounted for, given that no one's been in this position for, I don't know how long, but we'll start there.
Great. Thank you for the question, Senator. Jeff Kinder, Deputy Administrator with NDEP. That's a good question. So the position, the supervisor position, recently became vacant due to a retirement. We figured it was a good opportunity with the work that we're doing now to look at this reclassification. Any savings from that position from when it became vacant to when we fill it would go into our reserve account in the AIR program and continue to support the AIR program.
Okay. Can you just talk a little bit about how recruitment and retention issues among your staff might possibly be solved by these reclassifications?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Jeff Kinder, for the record, Deputy Administrator with NDEP. I think for recruitment purposes, looking at this position, we do have a number of engineers at NDEP. So for at least a supervisor position, this would create an opportunity potential for in-house staff to continue further in their career or allow us to seek recruitment outside if that's what we chose to do.
Thanks, Jeff. Greg Lovato, NDP Administrator for the record. I think in terms of recruitment and retention, it'll have limited effect. I think that this is really just making sure that we're appropriately classifying the position for the work that it's performing. But the larger context of recruitment and retention remains. So trying to attract and retain, as I mentioned before, younger talent will remain a challenge with the existing environment. I think the effort to reclassify positions or, have pay increases may keep existing staff maybe in a slightly better position. I don't know myself that it actually is going to help us, increase our recruitment and retention.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll go to Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Thank you, Chair Watts. I had a question on E256 about the satellite imagery to monitor air quality. Can you tell me a little bit more about how this imagery is going to protect and improve the air quality? And also, who are we purchasing these images from?
Thank you, Assemblywoman, for the question. Jeff Kinder, Deputy Administrator with NDEP. So we have not selected a vendor at this time. We've just basically done research with the availability out there and came up with the estimate for the enhancement. How it would help protect air quality is, so when we have a wildfire event, so we maintain a series of monitors throughout the state, and those will begin to show when we have events such as a wildfire smoke event. But that is not enough to demonstrate that that's an exceptional event to the state. We actually have to show where the fire is, where the smoke plume actually went, and show what part of the states it actually impacted. So this satellite imagery would help us do that in our demonstrations with EPA when we're looking for exceptional events, as well as, again, for permitting when we're doing these large permitting projects throughout the state. It'll help us better define. So I guess backing up a little bit, when we do a permitting project, we always model a permitting project, and a model goes through and looks at the proposed emissions, where the facility at, what the facility's fence line is at. It looks at historical meteorological data, and it projects what the impacts will be on air quality as far as it goes with those ambient air quality standards. So to be able to accurately place those facilities, what their actual fence lines are, will also help us improve our permitting process.
Follow-up, Chair? Thank you. So the satellite imagery will not actually read the pollution levels. I guess my question would be, have we talked to some of our federal partners like EPA or NOAA just to see what they might have available for us, especially when we're talking about wildfires? Because it's my understanding that the satellite capable to read pollution levels won't be scheduled to be available until 2032. So have we talked to any of our federal partners?
So thank you for the question, Assemblywoman. Jeff Kinder, Deputy Administrator with NDEP for the record. That's a great question. So no, this will not measure, these satellite images will not measure concentrations of pollutants at this point. All they will do is just give us, graphically where these big pollution events are occurring and which parts of the state they're affecting. We maintain the monitoring networks for the state as well as Clark and Washoe air agencies within their jurisdictions. So all the monitoring that's done in the state is done by the state, not at the federal level. But we have worked closely with federal EPA on this project and what we're looking to accomplish as we do these demonstrations for them.
Thank you. Okay. We'll go with Senator Goycochea, then Assemblywoman Dickman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I am kind of wondering, now, how long will it take you to go out with an RFP then for the satellite imagery? And will you have that up and running by, say, summer?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Jeff Kinder, Deputy Administrator with NDEP. Yes, our hope is to be ready to go for this fire season if approved. We don't believe there'll be too much logistics. There are a number of companies that provide this data. And again, another number of options for this data. We can look for, higher resolution, lower resolution, different types of satellites that are in area. So there's a number of options for us to go depending on what type of impacts we're expecting, depending on the upcoming season.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up or comment more than anything. With the precip we've had in Nevada this year, I assume we're going to get some forage production, and we probably will have some fire by fall. So the way I understand it, with this imagery, you can see where the plume is going and then, in fact, dial into your air quality, your monitoring network, and then understand what the impacts are. You see the plume goes across northeastern Nevada, 100-mile strip, either with those monitors you've got in place, or i.e. in northern Nevada, the mining companies have in place. You do have a network that you can actually test air quality in that plume, correct?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Jeff Kinder, Deputy Administrator with NDP. That is correct. We do have a number of monitors in the site, and this imagery just won't be, centric to Nevada, right? For events occurring outside of Nevada, we'll be able to track those and their smoke impacts on our state.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Assemblywoman Dickman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a question about, does the division plan to adopt the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regs from California? And if so, could you talk a little bit about that and how it would work?
Thank you, Greg Lovato for the record, Assemblywoman Dickman. We're currently evaluating a number of greenhouse gas policies. We've, under the report that Deputy Administrator Kinder talked about, we're responsible for identifying a number of greenhouse gas reduction policies to meet the goals stated in NRS. And we're currently evaluating whether we should be moving forward with Clean Cars 2, as it's called. There's probably a range of options to look at with Clean Cars 2. Right now, we are working on reviewing, pursuant to the recent executive order, reviewing all of our regulations and looking for streamlining opportunities at this time. So that's been our focus over the, over the coming weeks. But we do think that it's worth continuing to look at ways to reduce emissions, both for meeting GHG goals, but also just for air quality purposes. The ozone levels in Washoe and Clark County, even aside from wildfire events, are at risk of increasing non-attainment. And really, the only way we can address those as Nevadans is to look at reducing vehicle emissions. We do have, similar to, other states with the type of topography we have, these basins have a tough time, getting rid of air pollution. And so we have not made a decision to move forward, but we're going to continue to evaluate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any additional questions from members? All right, seeing none, you can go ahead and move to the next budget account.
Great, thank you, Chairman Watts, members of the Commission. Jeff Kinder, Deputy Administrator with NDP. We'll now talk about Budget Account 3187. This budget account has several bureaus within NDP. It includes the Bureau of Sustainable Materials Management, which I'll talk about now, as well as the Bureau of Federal Facilities and the Bureau of Corrective Actions that Administrator Lovato will cover shortly. Again, a number of enhancements. I'll focus on E251 that is bolded on the slide. Here, we're requesting to do a statewide waste characterization study. In 1991, the legislature established a recycling goal for Nevada of 25%. We have struggled to meet that goal over the years. The only time we have met or exceeded that goal was 2011 to 2013, where we exceeded the 25%. And an interesting thing we noticed during that time was not so much that there was more diversion going on to recycling, but there was less waste generated in the state, which, improved the way we calculate the recycling rate. So to better understand that, we're proposing a waste characterization study that would provide information on how to better manage materials disposed in our landfills. And, looking at the material composition, such as, how much paper, how much glass, how much food waste, things that, there are recycling opportunities for. It would be done by taking grab samples at landfills or working with haulers, and would be done on a weight basis. So just a little more information on that. Our Bureau of Sustainable Materials Management did update its name in 2019 from the Bureau of Waste Management. The reason for that was to look more holistically at the issue, not just recycling, but recycling as a part of overall sustainability within our state. Additionally, in 2021, our Bureau was able to bring together businesses, nonprofits, and government agencies to leverage sustainability programs across the state. We call that effort the Partners for a Sustainable Nevada, and it's opened up a forum for all of the state to come together and talk about sustainability challenges and sustainability opportunities. But back to E251, this waste characterization would let us know what is being disposed of in our landfills currently and help us to look for opportunities where we could do enhanced recycling or diversion from our landfills. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or anything else, any other enhancements we have.
All right, thank you. We'll get right to questions. We'll start with Assemblywoman Brown May.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I actually have a question relative to Decision Unit E252, the Anaconda Copper Mine site cleanup piece. And I understand that this is a Phase 3 operation, right? So we're still in first phase. And I'm curious to know, can you give us a brief overview of recent cleanup activities at the copper mine site? And then what work do you anticipate will be completed through this 23-25 biennium?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Brown May, Greg Lovato for the record. So the Anaconda copper mine site, we've divided the cleanup into 3 phases. The first phase covered a set that was actually didn't have a viable, responsible party. And so that portion of the site was originally proposed to be taken care of through federal funding. And so when we entered into an agreement in 2018, we were able to manage the site, and that sort of orphan share is what we call it. That was about a $40 to $50 million phase of the cleanup. We had already got through cost estimations. So we're mostly done with that. Over the past several years, we have capped all the heap leach pads that were draining down acid fluid. We've improved the whole stormwater and pond structure around those. So we actually had a bit of a open house groundbreaking this past August to showcase all the work that had happened out there. We expect that work to conclude in the next biennium for Phase 1, and we expect, I think it's probably through 2024, and then we'll actually be paying bills probably through 2025 because of the billing cycles. The state has a 7.8% cost share of that part of the cleanup, and so that would be the end of the state's cost share for the whole entire site once that Phase 1 is complete. And then in terms of the second phases, those involve northern areas of the site, including groundwater, and areas off-site where groundwater has migrated from the site, and then southern areas of the site, including the pit lake. So we're still in the risk assessment, feasibility study stage. We expect to reach some remedy selections and decisions for those, I think maybe towards the end of the biennium, and that construction for those would happen thereafter. We're expecting construction for the whole site to be complete in 2029, but the state will not have liability for those phases.
Thank you. Follow-up, Chair. Thank you for that explanation. I sincerely appreciate the level of detail, phase 1, 2, and 3. You talked a little bit about 7.8% of the cost share is the state's liability. Do you have any idea when we're going to know what our portion is? What's the total cost, our orphan share that you talked about?
We have Greg Lovato for the record, or Assemblywoman Brown May. We have a pretty good information on that. I think we just provided a follow-up, what we've spent to date, what we've incurred cost to date, and then what we have remaining. And so if you look at around 50 million, about 7.8% would be the total cost share. But we can get you more specific answers.
Thank you, Mr. Lovato. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Other members with questions? I know we have Assemblywoman Anderson, I believe, that has one. All right, Assemblywoman Anderson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Under E 805 and 806, I believe it has to do with the position reclassification. I have a feeling I already know the answer, but still want to get it on record. Please briefly describe any sort of recruitment and retention issues that you're having with the analysis staff, and then how these reclassifications might impact the effort in that, in both recruiting as well as retaining.
Thank you. Assemblywoman Anderson, Greg Lovato for the record. So these are really reclassifications to accommodate and acknowledge the change in scope and responsibility of the position. So there's increased responsibility for E805. We're asking our admin assistant to work on cost recovery issues, contract processing and management, and budget maintenance and reconciliation across multiple budget accounts. The other one, E806, we're talking about planning functions for our Brownfield program, Petroleum Fund, abandoned mine lands cleanups, and development implementation of electronic record management system. So this is work that's occurring and ongoing, but we're just changing the position classification in order to account for that. These particular positions, we do have staff in them, and I think we're going to be able to maintain those. So this is just, I wouldn't say this is the division's attempt to increase recruitment and retention. I think that's a larger discussion.
Thank you. Next, I believe Senator Nguyen has a question.
Thank you. We can talk a little bit about recycling and the Bureau of Sustainable Materials and Management. Can you kind of discuss kind of the current status of the existing programs for recycling and the reuse of materials, and how these additional grants will promote the sustainability and how it would impact those efforts?
Thank you for the question. Jeff Kinder, Deputy Administrator with NDEP. So recycling in the state, of course, is done by jurisdiction. We have single stream recycling in our larger areas. But when we get to rural Nevada, we have challenges. We have a lot of challenges with infrastructure. You have to look at the profitability of recycling, and when we have to collect it on a small basis and transport it long distances, that really eats into those opportunities. So for many years, the Bureau has given out grants, large and small jurisdictions, but just a lot of that is really focused on either education, educational materials, or enhancements to infrastructure to be able to more efficiently collect and transport material. So based on our funding, the fees that we collect, based on economic conditions, we've basically been able to support that at the $50,000 level. But we're looking for an enhancement to raise that based on increased fees we're seeing right now. But it's to support smaller groups to be able to enhance either that education or infrastructure part of recycling.
Thank you. Additional questions from members? All right. I do have one, and I had the great fortune of being able to attend a couple of the Partners for Sustainable Nevada meetings, and it's great to see some of the work out of that broad stakeholder group be reflected into your agency's budget and programs. I know there's been migration away from, the solid waste plan to sustainable materials management. And I can see as well, when it comes to this grant program that was, again, originally around solid waste, recycling, now taking a more holistic approach at waste management and reduction. And I know that the waste characterization study was also somewhat born out of those discussions and data gaps that were highlighted by those stakeholders. Could you just give us briefly a little bit more information on the timeline of that study, and the benefits, and particularly how those are addressing some of the data gaps that were identified by that stakeholder group?
Thank you, Chairman Watts, for the question. Jeff Kinder, Deputy Administrator with NDEP. That's a great question. I really appreciate it. We always like to say at NDEP, if we can't measure it, we can't manage it. And so there are a lot of data gaps with what goes into our landfills currently. And stepping back, not just looking at purely recycling, but looking at the whole sustainability. If we can reuse a material, we don't have to create a raw material. Someone's waste product might be somebody's feedstock and might benefit both organizations by being able to put them in touch. The waste characterization study, looking at other states that do waste characterization studies. Some of them do them one-offs, use that information and move on. Some of them do them regularly. And what we've seen is those states that are doing waste characterization studies have a significantly higher recycling rate than even what we're shooting for here in the state. And so initially what we would probably do is go out and do those touches at the landfills, see what's actually going in, taking those samples, weighing them, and then probably broadening it more to, where is it being collected, where is it being transported, what's coming into the state, that's not generated in our state. So we would see it as a phased opportunity to start filling in those data gaps and finding out what materials, we are currently disposing of that do have value and can be reused. Also looking at, in the larger communities, we have recycling sorting centers. That would be a great opportunity for us to gather some data.
Greg Lovato for the record. I just wanted to add to that we do have the waste management companies participating in the Partners for Sustainable Nevada, and all the efforts that we'd be doing as far as waste characterization, they would be voluntarily participating in because they're just as interested in understanding this as everybody else.
Thank you very much. All right, Senator Goicoechea.
Just one quick one. How many recognized or licensed landfills do you manage in the state? Do you have that number?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Jeff Kinder, Deputy Administrator with NDEP. I wish I had it off the top of my head, but I'd be happy to respond back to the committee today with that number.
It's got to be in the thousands. Huh? You don't even have 1,000 recognized? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. If you can follow up with the senator about that, we'd appreciate it. All right, last call for questions on this budget account. All right, seeing none, thank you, and welcome back, Director. We do have, we're going to go out of order on the agenda to wrap things up with your agency, so we're going to go ahead and go to the overview of the general obligation bonds. We'll ask that you keep the overview fairly brief, and then we'll get a couple questions so we can move on to our last budget account of the day.
Thank you, Chairman. In that respect, we did send some answers off the previous questions to you by email for all of the 28 conservation districts, a link to the dcnr.nv.gov website, which then points out a nice map that has all those in the regions that are associated with it for the State Conservation Commission. And in that respect, though, in front of you today, we're going to go on to the general obligation bond programs. With that, I have the director of DCNR, Dominic Etchgoen, running the PowerPoint, and we also have, of course, Brandon Bishop, who is a program manager. We'll proceed, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Brandon Bishop. I'm the Conserve Nevada Program Manager. Today I'll be doing a run view of our general obligation bond programs. So we have 4 programs within our department. We have the Conserve Nevada program, the Commission for Cultural Centers and Historic Preservation Grant Program, the Lake Tahoe Environmental Improvement Program managed by the Nevada Division of State Lands, the Water Infrastructure Capital Program managed by NDEP. And going in a little deeper, the Conserve Nevada program was authorized by AB 84 in the 80th session for $217.5 million for bond sales. And this is to preserve and protect and enhance Nevada's natural and cultural resources. The Commission on Cultural Centers and Historic Preservation Grant Program, created through NRS 383.530, authorizes up to $3 million annually to preserve and enhance cultural resources around the state, including historic buildings and cultural centers. The Lake Tahoe Environmental Improvement Program was authorized up to $100 million in bonds through the 2009 Statutes of Nevada, Chapter 431. This provides for wildfire mitigation, lake water quality, conservation, and outdoor recreation projects within the Lake Tahoe Basin. And the Water Infrastructure Capital Improvement Grant Program, authorized through NRS 349.986, provides up to $125 million in obligation bond sales for projects that improve wastewater and drinking water across the state. So these programs have historically been funded through a provision in the state's constitution, Article 9, Section 3, related to state general obligation bond debt. There are 2 types of debt, exempt and non-exempt. Typically, the caveat for exempt is if it preserves or protects the natural resources of the state of Nevada, or the benefit of those resources or the property of the state. And this is kind of where the bond programs delineate whether they count towards the state debt or whether they don't. So looking at our statewide need, moving into the biennium, each program undergoes a review with our partner organizations, getting pre-applications and various items to see what projects are out there statewide and what the overall need and capacity for our partners to get stuff on the ground. So the Conserve Nevada program went through this, and we saw that there's nearly $389 million in need statewide. The CCHP grant program also conducted this, and there was around $12.7 million in need statewide for cultural programs and historic preservation. The Lake Tahoe Environmental Improvement Program in the basin showed a need of $8.5 million. And then the Water Infrastructure Capital Improvement Grant Program has well over $40 million in need, but this was what was identified as an example of projects that could be tackled within the coming biennium. But you can see on the left-hand side there of this slide, it shows each of the authorities still remaining in legislation compared to the level of need. And then we'll move on to the Conserve Nevada program deeper dive. So Conserve Nevada was authorized by AB 84 of the 80th session for $217.5 million. There were several various categories that were direct funded recipients within the bill that were called out. These include Nevada Division of State Parks, Nevada Department of Wildlife, Springs Preserve, Clark County Wetlands Park, Vegas Valley Rim Trail, and then state lands for the Caliente Depot restoration. So on this slide, you can see that on the left-hand slide, this gives the appropriations for the current biennium. So the program was appropriated $20 million through AB 492 of the 2021 session. And of this, we have spent $2.85 million to date. And then we have $14.6 million currently obligated under contract. Many of these are capital improvement projects or design type specifications. So as we move forward, we'll start seeing those expenditures go through pretty rapidly. But on the right-hand side, you can see that $389 million need. And that's broken down $43.7 million for Nevada Division of State Parks for projects across the state. And this includes things like the new Valley of Fire Visitor Center, some of the Ice Age Fossil State Park, and then some of our development out at Walker. In the Nevada Department of Wildlife, there's 7.5 million identified within their need, and this includes all sorts of habitat restoration across the state of Nevada. It also includes some financing related to the wildlife crossings and various programs. But NDOW's particularly good at matching these funds with federal and other resources to really stretch the dollars. Actually, all of our partners are, and they do a fantastic job at that. The Vegas Valley Rim Trail was not identified, and that's because they're currently under planning and likely wouldn't have the capacity within the biennium. And then $6 million for the Clark County Wetlands Park. This is to continue the wetlands loop trail around the park, and this will allow them to finish that segment to make it completely connect. Las Vegas Springs Preserve, $10 million. This is for the renovation of the Origin Museum. And then we have $1 million additional for Caliente Depot for its continued restoration. $5 million for the Lake Tahoe East Shore Trail, and this is to leverage federal dollars, should they become available, to make this trail go from Sand Harbor to Spooner. And then we had over $288 million in competitive grants, and this is for things like wildfire mitigation and restoration, wetlands improvements, outdoor recreation development, so trails, all sorts of things in that avenue. But that provides a pretty high-level overview. We also included the needs assessment to the committee if they have any questions on that. So we'll go on to some of our projects specifically. So this was called out in the executive budget, the Boulder City Railroad Museum and Visitor Center. This is a huge economic development initiative of Boulder City. There are a lot of partners working on this, but it's $23.3 million for the Boulder City Railroad Museum, which will essentially be a gateway for that community and help to develop out that full museum and visitor center. Overall, currently, Conserve Nevada is funding the design and planning being conducted by LGA Architecture. And these are some of the renderings that they provided for us down below. But we're excited. I believe we have one of our partners who will be providing some testimony later on. But we'll move on.
Actually, I believe we have somebody who hopefully has been enjoying his time observing the legislature, but has moved on to bigger responsibilities running a city. So we'll take a brief pause here to hear from Mayor Hardy, and then we'll go back to the overview, and we'll ask to wrap up the other bond programs quickly so we can get to questions and move on. Go ahead, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, it has been fascinating. It's like deja vu all over again. Appreciate the spirited conversation, and I have to admit I did chuckle at my former colleague James Settlemeyer is now part of the government. I couldn't suppress a little chuckle, but he and I are part of the government in different ways right now. But yes, I'm here in very good support of the Nevada State Railroad Museum that happens to be in Boulder City, and it's going to allow a linear park, and the linear park is obvious with the Railroad Museum because it parallels the tracks, and there will be a road that will get it better access to the businesses that are going to be close to that. So yes, I'm thrilled that we are having this conversation. I love the word excited that was just used in describing this. It will be a good, as was said, a good gateway into the city, and look forward to having the cooperation between the city and the state. The city has already promised $200,000 towards that venue, and we look forward to continuing our relationship with the state of Nevada.
Thank you very much, Mayor. We'll go back to the overview, and I think for the sake of time, if you can just give us the overview of the other bond programs, and then if folks have questions about specific projects, we'll just cover that in member questions.
Thank you, Chairman and Committee. This is Brandon Bishop for the record. So to continue on with our presentation, the the Valley of Fire Visitor Center is one of the opportunities to fund. So far, we have had a private donor move forward, pledging $7 million, and we're hoping that Conserve Nevada funding could potentially be used for $8 million to get it over the top. The next bond program is the Lake Tahoe Environmental Improvement Program. This slide provides an overview of that program, but the overall level of need for the biennium is $8.56 million. This slide provides different categories of projects that could be funded within the next biennium. And we'll move on to the Commission on Cultural Centers and Historic Preservation and Grant Program. Overall, the level of need identified within the coming biennium is $12.7 million, and this does projects all around the state. And there are a lot of fantastic projects listed on this slide. If you have any additional questions, we can provide detail. And then our next program is our NDEP Water Capital Grant Program. We have a number of projects across the state. This identifies 4 example projects that could be completed within the biennium. With $40 million, we'd be able to leverage around $86.8 million in federal funding to tackle projects that don't necessarily qualify specifically for the SRF, but could qualify for this funding. So that kind of wraps up the bond programs at a high level, and we'll be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bishop. Members, questions on the bonds? All right, I do have one. So and I think this came up in the original briefing, so we've seen kind of included is the funding for the Railroad Museum in Southern Nevada. So that's been included as a recommendation in the governor's budget. You know, I think you've gone through and really highlighted that there's been a broader needs analysis and a needs assessment, and we do have some additional affordability, both in the conservation bonds program outside of those 2 projects you highlighted, and then we have affordability in the Tahoe EIP that it looks like I think would meet the needs the needs that have been laid out in the materials you provided, and then there'll have to be some prioritization, obviously, with the conservation bonds and with the cultural center's historic preservation grant. So could you just speak a little bit more to what that process is going to look like over the biennium is your intention to allocate all of the affordability that's available over this biennium to various projects based on this needs assessment? Because we've kind of seen what looks like a pretty strong commitment on a couple, and just want to make sure that we're continuing to move forward in addressing these other needs moving forward.
Thank you, Chairman. This is Director Settlemeyer for Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Mr. Bishop will add more detail. What I'm doing right now is meeting with the treasurer, because I think it's important to point out, back to the previous slide on 32, that the Nevada State Constitution, Article 9, Section 3, provides 2 different types of bonds, and all bonds dealing with 2 states that have a compact fall into the exempt category and don't fall into the 2% bond indebtedness that is inside the governor's purview. So I think the desire there was to work with the treasurer and see the funds that he's already presented to the committee and make sure that those funds are allocated as he had indicated to the Tahoe projects. Again, they'd fall outside because they are exempt. So I believe that's where a lot of this is being worked out, and I apologize for not having far more details on that, being a little bit new to the concept of exempt, non-exempt, and all the other terminologies that I'm being forced or pleasantly being able to learn at the same time is part of this. So that's kind of a short answer to that. If Mr. Bishop wishes to elaborate, he's more than welcome.
Thank you for that. And if you say the treasurer's name a couple times, he'll come into the committee room and give us all an education. Go ahead, Mr. Bishop.
Like Beetlejuice, just kidding.
Thank you, Chair. Brandon Bishop for the record. Just to elaborate on that, our goal would be to work with our partner organizations to identify some of their higher priorities, especially the direct fund recipients, and see what their capacity would be moving into the biennium realistically, because we want to get those bond dollars spent as rapidly as we can, because we have that 3-year window. But Optimally, we have been in development of the regulations for the program, so that way we can launch the competitive grant program. So it would be exciting to be able to fund a portion of those competitive grants. Certainly, we are not going to be able to fund $288 million in need, but I think that helps demonstrate what is out there. So if we can fund a portion of that, that would be a priority of the program. But our overall goal is to fund projects that can put great projects on the ground, but also leverage funding appropriately from private and federal dollars.
Thank you for that clarification. So we look forward to getting some additional information as some of those processes move forward, and I think it's helpful to understand when we see, we saw included in the governor's recommended budget this major museum initiative in Southern Nevada, which I think is very welcome. But want to make sure that some of those other partners that you had indicated that have projects kind of in the queue are also moving forward, and it does sound like that is the case and the intent from the agency. The other question I had very briefly is on the Tahoe EIP bond. So it was authorized in 2009. At what point do you have any indication of when we may need to reauthorize that bond program?
Thank you for the question, Brandon Bishop, for the record. I don't know that off the top of my head. We could provide additional information. We also have Charlie Donahue in the room who may be able to provide additional information to that question.
Welcome, Mr. Donahue.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Charlie Donahue. I serve as the administrator for the Division of State Lands. Just doing some quick math. The agency has determined we have the capacity to spend about $4 million annually. So Brandon's slide, number 33, indicates we have about $71.5 million left in authority. So I would say probably in about 8 years we would need to be considering that. I would like to just make one comment about this slide as well, that the assessment and what the Nevada Tahoe resource team has identified for the next biennium in terms of the projects that we manage is a little over $8 million. However, we believe there will be a bill for $13 million sponsored by the Interim Committee for the Oversight of TRPA and the Marlette Lake Water System. That's because towards the end of, at the time that we needed to submit a request for a BDR and we were working with the Interim Committee, transportation really daylighted and there was a huge need for that. And I felt extremely comfortable conceptually allocating about $5 million towards our partners' efforts. And what we've identified as a project for that would be the development of an aquatic invasive species permanent inspection station, as well as associated parking to access the trail that Brandon mentioned from Sand Harbor to Spooner. I think you may hear a little bit more about that from Julie Reagan, but I just wanted to make sure I had that on the record, that clarification.
Thank you very much, Mr. Donahue. We appreciate that, and I know that transportation is going to be an issue that comes up in the TRPA presentation. So thanks for queuing that up for us. Members, any last questions for the department? All right, seeing none, thank you, Director. Thank you to your team for your presentations today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee subcommittee. Appreciate the opportunity to present this. I tried to be a little bit less thorough, but a little bit more informative this time for your entertainment. To answer your previous question, though, on the water thing, at that meeting we had the Central Nevada Humboldt River Water Authority, Truckee Meadows Water Authority, Southern Nevada Water Authority, the Nature Conservancy, Department of Ag, League of Cities, and we're still remembering the other 4. Luckily, one of the deputies from NDEP, Jennifer Carr, was able to reach out to me by text. She was listening in and gave me the partial list. We'll get you the more formalized list.
Thank you, and we'll get that to staff and make sure it's distributed to all members. Thank you again for all your time today. We'll move on to our last budget for the day, which is the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. Welcome. Whenever you are ready, you can introduce yourself for the record and begin.
Thank you, Chair Watts, and members of the committee, members of the public, our partner agencies. Delighted to be here this morning. I am Julie Reagan, and I am the Executive Director of the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. I've addressed this body for many years. This is the first time as the director, just coming in over the last couple of months after serving for about 18 years in an executive capacity as Deputy Director. So really happy to be here. Happy Valentine's Day. And with me, I have my colleagues. To my left is Chris Kyler, our Finance Director at TRPA, and Carl Hasty, the District Manager of the Tahoe Transportation District, one of our partner agencies. And the three of us have some slides for you, and we look forward to your questions. And while we're getting the slideshow loaded, I'll just start with some basic introduction. And I know many of you, having served in the legislature, are familiar with the TRPA, and some new faces. For your benefit, I'll give you just some basic facts and figures. First of all, we love to present the budget in a good snow year, so everyone's in a very good mood. We are looking at about 185% of our median snowpack year over year and over the average. And of course, that is a wonderful thing for Lake Tahoe, for the water level, reducing fire danger, for the water supply for the state of Nevada, which flows, we're a terminal system that the lake headwaters that goes through the Truckee River into Pyramid Lake. So that's good news. But what we've all learned, many of us who have been in Tahoe for many years, is that one good year does not eliminate a drought threat in the future. And we may have a couple of good years and have reduced danger, but we know the threat is always there. And that's part of what we wanted to cover as it relates to our budget. So we are about 1.5 feet over the natural rim of elevation. The elevation of the natural rim of the lake is at 62.23 feet, and we're sitting over like 62.24 and a half. So that is very good news for the lake. I'll take the next slide. Thank you, Chris. Many of you who have served in this body and have been to Lake Tahoe understand our very interesting history, but I just wanted to run through a timeline because I think it sets up the context for our budget decisions, or the budget decisions that you'll be making, and the conversations that we'll have about fiscal impacts. And so looking at Tahoe, it's really a fascinating tale of development boom from starting in the 50s and 60s, but when the Olympics happened at Squaw Valley, now Palisades, Tahoe, in 1960, it put Lake Tahoe on the map. And it really combined with this boom of vacation planning following World War II and a beautiful place to escape into the mountains. And that unleashed a big boom of development without a lot of planning. And of course, we have a very complicated jurisdiction. We have 2 states, California and Nevada, about 9 or 10 federal agencies that operate in the lake, the U.S. Forest Service being the largest landholder at almost 80% of the land in Tahoe, and many local governments, the private sector, nonprofits. So there were a lot of folks that were starting to get alarmed about the amount of development. And if you follow that timeline, looking when Heavenly Ski Resort opened, the airport on South Shore, the Olympics, and then, of course, the highway system, the first casino, Harvey's Wagon Wheel in the early days of the 60s. And then you get to 1969 when TRPA was established by this bi-state compact. And I'll talk a little bit about the uniqueness of our interstate compact. But then the population continued, the recreation demands on the resource continued, and by the time we get back up to 1980, population growth had increased by 16 times in since the 1950s. So we just saw this really consolidated boom, and we definitely had folks that said this is not a path that we want to go onto. By the time you factored out all the build-out scenarios for Tahoe back in the 50s, folks were considering a size city of San Francisco, a city with a hole in the middle, the lake being the hole, with massive development and a bridge over Emerald Bay. And that prompted scientists to really start studying the ecology of the lake, to look at what would happen should such a scenario play out over time. And that generated a lot of concern and mobilized action. And so that prompted us to then move into this interstate compact, which continues to this day, 53 years later, to be a landmark policy achievement in the United States. And I must channel the great Senator Co Swobe, who served on our governing board for many years, and Co has told the story of how Nevada played a signature role in shepherding this compact through with the state of California, through the Congress, ultimately having President Nixon in 1969 sign that with Governors Laxalt in Nevada and Governor Reagan at the time of California. And here we are in 2023. We remain very unique in the country. The General Accountability Office in Washington did a study of interstate compacts some years back, and the closest probably is Columbia River Gorge Commission up in Washington and Oregon. That interstate compact, though, does not give the commission land use authority and development management. And that is the unique feature that we have in Lake Tahoe. And we also connect our role in Tahoe with transportation. TRPA has what's called the MPO authority, Metropolitan Planning Organization, which was designated in federal law. Even though we're a small year-round, small rural community, mostly of residential population, less than 60,000, we have special dispensation through the Congress to have the MPO authority for transportation. And that allows us to pass monies through to our partners in transportation. Carl will speak to a bit of that, as well as to our local government partners and transit operators. And that's really unique to connect land use and transportation together with a policy imperative within the compact to reduce dependency on the private automobile. And we all know that is a big challenge. We can go to the next slide. So when you drive,
And sorry
Yes,
to
sure,
interrupt, but
sure.
if you can move a little bit faster through the overview so we can get into the budget accounts, we would appreciate it.
You bet. I will rock it right through. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick note on these signs. When you run into the basin, you'll see these watershed signs. I wanted to thank our partners at Nevada Division of our Environmental Protection and via US EPA funds. These signs are only on the Nevada side. We're working to get them on California, so appreciate that, and it lets you know you're in a special place. Next slide. Really the three primary phases of Lake Tahoe's history in terms of protection with the compact, as I mentioned, on the left, really looking at regulatory constraints, and in the middle we've entered the EPIC collaboration phase of the Environmental Improvement Program, which you heard about related to the bonds, and that will come up. And then now we're in this EPIC collaboration phase of resiliency. A couple of key stats, I won't dwell on this slide, but really looking at the $5 billion visitor-facing economy as being critical, and 1,700 jobs a year that are supported by the EIP are a couple of key statistics. The challenges that we face, I think we'll take the next slide there, Chris. We won't dwell on these either, but it really does impact the resource allocations when you look at retention of employees. We've heard some conversation of this committee. The whole basin is facing a workforce shortage problem related to housing. The average sales price of a home is $950,000 in Lake Tahoe, and that also constrains our workforce, and we'll speak to that as well. And then moving into the last slide before the budget accounts is our focus on customer service. I've been at the agency for 20 years. We have very much worked to improve our public service over time. And so a lot of the investments that we'll be talking about are related to technology and allowing more access online. We are now at almost 83% of our permit submittals online, which COVID forced the issue, but we're very proud of that, and our team has worked very hard. And so using funds that you'll be hearing from to enhance our public service is a critical tenet. And with that, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will turn it over to Chris Kyler, our Finance Director.
Thank you, Julie. For the record, Chris Kyler, Finance Director for the agency. My apologies, I didn't do a nice pie chart like Natural Resources did. I realize I should have done that. The overall agency's budget is about $22 million for the current year. Of that, a little over $7 million, or about a third, comes from the two states, roughly $5 million from California, a little over $2 million from Nevada. The balance of the money, we get about $3.5 million a year from user fees for current planning from the AIS inspection program and from our new shoreline program. And then the rest of that money mostly comes in the form of grants. Traditionally, those grants have largely been on the transportation side through our role as an MPO, but more recently, a few years ago, through a lot of hard work by Julie and other people, we got the Lake Tahoe Restoration Act passed, and even better, they got it funded. So starting this year, we've just synced an agreement with the Forest Service that will bring in about $5 million a year to work on the AIS program, which the agency will administer and manage. This summary chart just kind of shows the overall baseline budget for the biennium and the 4 specific budget requests that we're asking you for today. Of the 4, Carl will speak to the last one. I do not have a separate slide for the salary increase one. If I can just touch on that briefly, for the last 3 sessions, you have provided funds so that TRPA employees can get the same increases that state employees do. The numbers on this chart represent a 5% increase, but both LCB and the budget office have the baseline numbers so they can adjust that to whatever decision you would like to make. This was inserted last year and last session in AB 493, the bill that sets the non-classified special positions in the state. That's how it's been done in the past. Getting into specific budget requests, the biggest one is the closing the gap to the compact. The compact, which also exists, which is also passed by the Nevada Legislature and the California Legislature and is embedded in NRS 277-190 through 220, calls for the agency to be funded at a 1/3 Nevada, 2/3 California ratio. That's a goal, but it's obviously subject to the individual budget actions of the state, including what you're doing here today. We'll look back over the last 15 years, and the chart's a little bit off here, but in the last 15 years, there's only been 1 year where the state of Nevada met the 1/3 goal in the compact. In 2007, with the recession, Nevada budgets got cut and our budget got cut. The California budget remained the same. And again, during COVID, the budgets in Nevada got cut and our budget remained, the California budget remained the same. So to close that gap would take about $366,000 per year. If you're able to fund that, then we would use that money to address 2 key issues. One is none of our employees, we're not Nevada employees, we're not California employees, we don't participate in the PERS systems, we don't have that kind of retirement program. And the agency never opted into Social Security, so our employees also do not get Social Security credits while they're working for the agency. So we have a defined contribution pension plan that is considerably less than any of the competing state and local entities, so we'd like to enhance that. The other area, which is funded out of our general fund, is the environmental monitoring contracts. This involves Desert Research Institute, UNR, UC Davis, USGS, et cetera, where we do all the monitoring on the lake. Those contracts all have escalation clauses in them, but we have not been getting additional funding to support that. So we're requesting that this budget enhancement would bring us to the 2/3, 1/3 ratio. The baseline California allocation is in the governor's budget in California. The other one, this is touching on what Julie's talking about with the 21st century customer service. The photograph is one aisle of one of our 3 file rooms. We have several million hard files there that we need to digitize. We'd been moving towards online permitting for a while. COVID accelerated that. As Julie indicated, we're now well over 80%. But in order to file an application stuff, you have to research the property and find out what's there. And right now, you have to come into the office, we have to dig the file out of one of these file rooms and look at it. So we started a project to scan all these files and get them in place. We did receive an initial funding of $250,000 from the state of Nevada using ARPA funds. We've just signed a contract with the scanner, we've prepared files, and we're starting to really get that up and running. We anticipate this to be a 4 to 5 year project and probably cost between $3 or $4 million. And we're here today then to ask you to continue to fund this project as we go forward. With that, if you don't have any questions, I will turn it over to Carl, and he can speak about TTD.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Carl Hasty. I'm the district manager for the Tahoe Transportation District. And a little bit about the district. We are also a compact agency. 1980 compact change created my organization, Article 9 of that compact. It is the only article of the compact that can be amended by the 2 states without having to go back to Congress. That was very purposeful, recognizing the kind of changing nature of transportation over the years, and that has been done a number of times. Between the 2 agencies, it is our responsibility to look at the region as a whole. There's basically about 11 different organizations involved in transportation at the basin. The 2 state DOTs, each local government, our 2 organizations, even some of the public utility districts are playing a role because They maintain and operate trails, paved trails, Class 1 trails and the like. But our two organizations are here to look at the basin as a whole and try to get that taken care of. TRPA plays a very important job with transportation. They have a very broad spectrum of responsibility when it comes to land use and environmental thresholds. They're here to make sure that transportation is integrated with that and that transportation is doing its job. My organization has a focus that's exclusively on transportation. We're here to implement. And so that's where we work together along with our partners. We have a board of 14. We're almost where TRPA is. They have a board of 15. We have some crossover there, so this is how we work together with in the region to get things done. We are new to you here in this budget process through TRPA. If you want to go ahead and put that to the next slide. Thank you. Some of our challenges are similar to what Julie has already articulated, so we can move on to that and get down to brass tacks here. Unlike TRPA, TTD was not set up in the compact to be a part of the state's budget. We are very much a special fund organization, and we are limited in what we're able to do with that, primarily because we do not have any kind of dedicated source for general fund, and that is what we're here for you today. We have been only staffed since 2009, thanks to some earmarks lasted for about 5 years. That has allowed us to tackle some of the very big contentious projects at Lake Tahoe that have been desired for a long time, including the Nevada state line to state line bike trail and the section that has been already constructed there from Incline to Sand Harbor. And then we're focusing on the next set of improvements for which some of the bonds you heard about today will be getting that done. The transportation program as a whole for Tahoe is very much a discretionary program. For that regional transportation, we don't have as much dedicated dollars as we would like. So we do a lot of pursuing federal funds and leveraging monies, and we've gotten very good at that as well. Transit is a pressing issue for the basin, with visitation especially, but it has been for years. The direction of the compact is really for us to deal with our congestion and our capacity issues for transportation via multimodal solutions. We are not here to expand highways as the way to address traffic and capacity. It is through public transit, it is through trails, it is through making Tahoe more bike and pedestrian friendly so that we have all those modes available to us. Ultimately, what Tahoe is looking to do is have a very integrated regional and interregional transit system. TTD's authority allows us to go outside of the basin boundary for purposes of connecting to our drive-up markets and starting to provide an alternative mode for folks to get up here without being in their car. And that's a big goal that we have, and that's a major part of the regional transportation plan. For us, then, the bottom bullet is the key. Then we are seeking through TRPA this figure of $6,500 over the biennium. Right now, the state of California provides us, through their sales tax return, about $2 million. In fact, this year it'll be $2.5 million for transit operations. For us, this is part of our source of general fund, because then based on salaries, we'll pull an ICAP on that in order to help fill that gap of general fund. And this is what we're seeking then, to kind of have Nevada help balance that out. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation and the overview. We do have some questions. I believe we'll start with Assemblywoman Gorlow. And I believe we have Senator Harris after that.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard from several departments about vacancy rates, and so I was curious, what is your current vacancy rate, your staff turnover, and what kind of positions is it that you're having difficulty recruiting, and what are those requirements?
Our currency, Chris Kyler, Finance Director for the agency, we currently have a 7% vacancy rate, and our turnover rate's been about 7.6%. Given the small size of the organization, the actual individual positions vary a lot from time to time, so I don't know that I could give you a particular area there's a shortage there, if I understood your question correctly.
Mr. Chair, if I can amplify, thank you, Assemblywoman, for the question. Julie Reagan, TRP Executive Director. I will say that cost of housing is a big issue for our recruitment and retention, as well as the fact, as Mr. Kyler pointed out, that we are not in the PERS system. So it really hurts our ability to recruit other staff from other public agencies. So those are continuing challenges that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Chair Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Can you give us an update on the records digitization project, including anticipated resources needed and maybe a timeline for completion? And then I'll have a second question after that.
Okay, Chris Kyler, for the Finance Director for the agency. What we've been doing is ever since all the online applications, of course, are already digitized, and we're digitizing everything that comes through the door now. In terms of the actual funding from the ARPA money, we just got that about in the spring. We did a comprehensive competitive procurement. We just now have that person on contract to do the actual scanning. But we've already spent about 500 hours of agency time pulling files and getting them ready. We're obviously prioritizing those files that have the greatest impact, that are most in demand for online usage. We have 100 boxes of files that are ready to go. They'll be shipped out any day now. So we're really kicking this up into high gear going forward. I'm sorry, does that answer everything? Or it'll probably take 3 to 5 years to complete it, depending on funding.
Okay, thank you. Do we know what the operational costs are that are going to be funded with the $250,000 each year? Could you describe that a little bit for us?
It's mostly going to be contract costs of doing the actual scanning. There's an issue of color money here. The ARPA grants are not usable for staff time. So right now we're paying the bill for our staff people out of our own budget, which is going to be about 1.5 FTEs. We've been kind of unclear in our requests as whether we're asking for general fund versus ARPA money. We're desperate. We'll take whatever we can get. But if we could get at least some general fund money for that, we could also cover our staff costs as well.
And your name for the record.
Sorry, Chris Kyler, Finance Director for the agency.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Senator and Chair Harris, thank you for the question. Just to tie back to some of the facts and figures that relate to this initiative, we are looking at a basin that's about $27 billion in assessed private property values, and that number is from the year before. It's jumped substantially just in the last year. And so these files are critical to escrows closing, to research on properties, to people just doing everyday projects, to add a bedroom when they have a new member of their family. And the digitization of what we do at TRPA is really a core mission of our public service. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, and thank you for making sure we've got a clear record, Chair. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. It's the reductions in the TRPA's annual appropriations, it sounds like have been pretty significant since whatever, I can't remember now what year that was. How has that impacted the agency's operations? And then also, if we do get a chance to approve this request, how will the funding be utilized?
Thank you, Assemblywoman, for the question. Julie Reagan, TRPA staff. I'll start, and perhaps Carl Hasty may want to jump in related to the TTD request specifically. I would say the issue with the 1/3, 2/3 share between California and Nevada has been historically a very important measure of collaboration in the basin. And really since the recession of 07, 08, Nevada has not been up to the full 1/3 share. Fortunately, we have that partnership with California that those funds have remained consistent. Nevada has been very active supporting the bonds you heard in your last presentation, and that has also helped continue restoration. But the general fund appropriation for TRPA, we've struggled. Like we've not filled positions. When I started at the agency in 2003, our headcount was approaching 190 positions roughly. We're sitting today at just about 70 positions, 68 positions. So we've been able to maintain a very nimble workforce, and we've used that process improvements to dictate that. But we're at max capacity, and our staff are really hitting the wall. But I will certainly turn it over to Carl to answer the question about transportation.
Carl Hasty, District Manager for the Tahoe Transportation District. For the district, these funds would provide us some stability on the general fund side, particularly for some key administrative staff positions, and particularly as we think about succession and the like and recruitment.
Follow-up. So just to make sure I've got this correct, if we were able to actually match it, it's mostly going to be for staffing and for stability, for training for future. Is that what I'm understanding you say in the different departments?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Julie Reagan, TRPA, for the record. Two separate asks. So there's the money to fulfill the 1/3 share of the Nevada for TRPA's general fund. That also would support monitoring and research. As Mr. Kyler alluded, our contracts with UNR, Desert Research, have continued to climb over these many years, and our general appropriation has not. So we would use that for research, monitoring, and for operational support. And then on the specific numbers for the Tahoe Transportation District would support their operations and staff.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll go to Assemblywoman Brown May.
Thank you, Chair. All about transportation, right? Multimodal accessibility. Love that we're really focusing in that area. I do have some questions relative to the overall funding framework. I understand much of the transportation that's provided currently is free. And so what's the support framework to be able to develop the transportation services in the Lake Tahoe Basin? And then can you talk a little bit about user fees and some of the commitments that we have from the federal government and other partners? How are we paying for fees?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Julie Reagan, for the record, TRPA. I'll start, and Mr. Hasty may want to jump in. The general framework for transportation, it flows from the MPO function that TRPA enjoys, and we pass monies through from the federal government, which are substantial but not nearly enough, to our transportation implementation partners. On the North Shore, Placer County implements the Tahoe Area Rapid Transit System, and on the South Shore, the Tahoe Transportation District, Mr. Hasty can speak to their usage for transit. But we also benefit from new programs through federal investment. For example, we were able to secure from our congressional delegation a congressionally designated funding contribution of $2 million for the Highway 28 corridor investment. And that's being programmed to support all the trails that you heard about connecting the Sand Harbor facility up to the top of Spooner. Also building a new invasive species inspection station at the top of Spooner for our invasive species program. And TRPA often acts as a fiscal agent to pass monies to where they need to go, whether it even be like the City of Lake Tahoe or the Transportation Management Association that runs the new micro transit systems you might have heard of. The Lake Link is a free service like Uber in a van, and we help support that overall. It's very complicated and creates a lot of opportunities for excellent partnership and collaboration. And then Mr. Hasty could speak to the specifics on user behavior, the importance of free, and to get more ridership.
Thank you, Carl Hasty, District Manager for the Tahoe Transportation District. And to elaborate a little bit more on that, it kind of varies around the basin in terms of the funding approaches. The transit system at North Shore, for example, operated by the Placer County, has a large local input. They dedicate about $6 million a year of transit occupancy tax to supplement their transit operations. A lot of that TOT also goes to capital projects, which becomes matched in pursuit of state of California or federal grants for their capital projects. On the South Lake side, where we operate, it's a little bit different, but we're also in position right now of having a great dialogue with the communities there of Douglas and the city of South Lake Tahoe about some dedicated transit occupancy tax to go to that. As Julie mentioned, microtransit is the latest kind of addition to integrating with mainline type of transit services to get to that first last mile, to use some transit jargon, get to neighborhoods. And so that's pretty exciting. For all of it, when it comes to transit, we're not unlike every other transit operation in the state or in the country, which is looking to the long term, how do we continue to build some sustained sources that will keep up with expenses as those continue to grow. When it comes to the capital side, to Julie's point, discretionary grants are a lot of what we use for the bulk from the federal side. Match dollars from the local or private side are very important to that. We have some funding partners like the Tahoe Fund who provide some private funds to help leverage. And so really, we've gotten good at the basin of just cobbling together all kinds of funding sources to get our program done. Our need is driven a lot by the user. And so, you know, how we looked at the future and put a lot of these things in place continues to be part of the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. I have two quick hits. One is just to make sure that we're clear and that all the members of the committee are clear. So my understanding is that you are a unique independent agency. The governor's recommended budget, I believe, included essentially kind of a baseline funding, but all of the enhancements that have been discussed, including getting back to our 1/3 share, are in addition, and so that would be on top of what's proposed in the governor's recommended budget. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Julie Reagan with TRPA staff. Yes, thank you. And I did want to thank the governor's office for continuing to work with us to look at an amendment to the budget as you well indicated, to look at the future of the 1/3 share. And we're working with the governor's office right now. We really appreciate their support. And I also must thank the interim committee for the legislative oversight of the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, because the interim committee was very involved in this very budget question. And as Mr. Hasty indicated, it is fairly complicated with all the different funding sources. And so we're trying to work through, as we get into the session, making that whole. Thank you.
Thank you. And then just really briefly going back to the raises. So you have proposed 5 and 5. As you know, there's been a proposal to do 8 and 4 for other state employees. And so just wanted to clarify, one, that, and you've indicated that in the past, we've essentially aligned COLAs or bumps for TRPA with other state employees. And so I just wanted to confirm, one, that's the intent. So this wouldn't be supplemental, but this would, it would be kind of aligned with other state employees. And two, that you'd be okay with getting to 12% instead of 10, if that's the way that we ultimately go.
Yes, Chris Kyler, Finance Director for the agency. Yeah, the intention, we're not asking for anything more or anything less than what state employees do, so you're exactly right. And all the data has been provided to LCB and the Budget Office to do that.
Thank you. Appreciate that quick response. Members, any additional questions? All right, seeing none, thank you again so much for your time and providing the overview of your budget today. Members, that takes us to the last item on our agenda, which is public comment. For those wishing to provide public comment by phone, you'll need to call 669-900-6833. When prompted, enter participant or meeting ID 84290537-184 and press pound. When prompted by our broadcast production services, you can go ahead and speak. We're going to ask, again, all public commenters to limit their testimony to 2 minutes. And with that, we'll begin with public comment here in Carson City. Go ahead, you can introduce yourself, state your name for the record, and you can begin.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Cadence Matievich, and I have the pleasure of serving as Government Affairs Liaison for Washoe County. I'm here today just to voice Washoe County's support for the TRPA's budget request, particularly the importance of transportation and the EIP dollars. We appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Matievich, and it's good to see you in your new role. We're seeing many people in new roles today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Kennedy McKinney, here today on behalf of the League to Save Lake Tahoe. The League to Save Lake Tahoe protects and restores the environmental health, sustainability, and scenic beauty of the Lake Tahoe Basin. We focus on water quality and its clarity for the preservation of a pristine lake for future generations. We are here today in strong support of the budget for the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. As the first and one of the only bi-state regional environmental planning agencies, TRPA plays a key role in the protection of Lake Tahoe. The budget that you heard today maintains Nevada's historical one-third contribution to the TRPA operations, and the funding outlined for the Environmental Improvement Program makes a significant difference for the environmental restoration in the basin, funding numerous projects that can help keep Lake Tahoe blue. We urge the subcommittee's support for this budget allocation, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much for your comments. All right, seeing no others here in Carson City, we'll go to Las Vegas. And seeing none there, Broadcast Production Services, can we see if we have anyone wishing to provide public comment by phone?
To provide public comment, press *9 on your phone now to take your place in the queue.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, go ahead, caller. We can hear you.
Thank you. This is Denise Davis. I'm a 27-year resident of Incline Village, and as a homeowner, I've been subject to the rules and regulations of the TRPA for all that time. While that has sometimes been frustrating and challenging, in the end, I thought it was all in order to preserve the only Lake Tahoe the world has. However, over the last few years, I and a growing number of people have become increasingly concerned about the direction of the TRPA. It's an agency that seems to have lost its way. Concern comes not only from the residents of the basin, but also from visitors to the area. In November, Lake Tahoe was listed on FOTR's No List 2023 as a place not to visit due to environmental concerns. A growing number of editorials and videos of our now frequent traffic jams and miles-long lines of vehicles would seem to indicate this is not an issue of locals who just want the area to themselves. Everyone can see the damage to our natural treasure. Yet the current focus of the TRPA is to increase density in the basin, all in the name of workforce and affordable housing. This housing is necessary, but it existed in the basin prior to the meteoric increase in short-term rentals. Options other than building more and bigger structures need to be explored. I'm asking you, the legislators of Nevada, to use your power of the purse to influence the TRPA to reconsider the direction it seems to be headed in. I would also add, if the distribution of the transient occupancy tax collected in the basin was changed, housing, transportation, and environmental programs could be funded. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, BPS, can we move to the next caller?
Good morning. My name is Caitlin Meyer. I'm the Chief Program Officer at the Tahoe Fund, which is a nonprofit whose role is to inspire the private community to support great environmental improvement projects around the Lake Tahoe Basin. And I'm calling in today to express support for two things, TRPA's budget, as well as including in the budget the $13 million in bonds for the Lake Tahoe Environmental Improvement Program. We at the Tahoe Fund also want to make sure that the committee and agencies represented here today know that the Tahoe Fund stands ready to continue to serve as a consistent source of private philanthropic funding to match, leverage, and fill gaps in public funding, including these bonds that are being discussed today. Since our founding, the Tahoe Fund has raised more than $20 million in private funds from individuals, businesses, and foundations. We've been able to leverage these private funds to secure significantly more public funding, upwards of $60 million. And this money has gone toward completing more than 80 projects around the basin alongside our partners, including the recent grand reopening of the improved Spooner State Park. For that project, the Tahoe Fund raised $300,000 for state parks, which then helped state parks secure $4 million in state bonds. And we also recently secured $200,000 to help complete phase 3 of the project. And our largest project in collaboration to date is the East Shore Trail. More than 1,300 donors have contributed more than $1 million to that project. And our private funds helped secure a $12.5 million federal grant, as well as create a $1 million long-term maintenance account for the trail. And we also want to make sure you know that we've committed $2 million in private funds to the expansion of SR 28 from Sand Harbor to Spooner to help supplement funds coming from the state. And in addition to these recreation and transportation projects, we're very focused on supporting the state's efforts on lake clarity, and most importantly, forest health, which is our top priority. And we've worked in close partnership with the state, including agencies like state parks, state lands, NDF, and DCNR more broadly, to make sure we're creating an impactful public-private partnership. So we're here today just asking that you continue to support Lake Tahoe with these important public funds, and we want to make sure you know that we will continue to do the work to bring private funding to the table. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your comments. BPS, can we move on to the next caller?
To provide public comment, press star 9 on your phone now to take your place in the queue. Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no more callers at this time.
All right, thank you. With that, that concludes our business for the day. Our next meeting will be on Thursday, February 16th at 8 o'clock a.m. in this room. We look forward to seeing you all then. This meeting is adjourned.